Hi, everyone. We are just going to let everyone get settled, so we'll get started in a few minutes. As you're joining, make sure you look over in the chat and share your name, organization, and where you guys are living. Shout out to Beaufort, South Carolina. I used to work at TCL, the Technical College of the Low Country. I see we have someone from London in Alaska. If you are just joining, please move over to the chat and introduce yourself. We're going to give it about 1 more minute before we get started. Vancouver. HCC. Is that Hillsborough Community College? I'm in Tampa right now, actually. Okay. Well, we are going to go ahead and get started. We have some amazing panelists, and we just want to make sure that we're very efficient with our time, and we want to get to the meat of this webinar. I'm Ashley Fabian. I am Kale's Director of Initiatives, and I work with workforce and higher education on different initiatives. It's my pleasure to host this. I think it's a very timely topic, and I'm excited for what we can all learn and share as a group. Kale is a nonprofit membership organization. It was founded 51 years ago to help organizations succeed by providing expertise, resources, and solutions that effectively support working adult learners as they navigate on and off ramps between education and employment. So we work with the entire workforce ecosystem. We partner with entities across the adult learner, like I just said, ecosystem to help create actionable career pathways along the journey of lifelong learning and meaningful work. Before we get started, a couple of quick housekeeping notes. Attendees are all muted and not on video, but we love to see you join in the conversation by entering your thoughts into the chat box, using the emojis, raising your hand if you have a question. Please enter the questions into the Q&A as you have them. The speakers will answer the questions at the end of the presentation. The webinar will be recorded, and our recording will be shared with all of those who registered. So I'm excited to get some um, get some good information out of this. So be sure to look in the chat. There will be resources that are popping in throughout the presentation. So we are going to get started with introductions, and I will pass it over to Saley to introduce themselves.
Thank you so much, Ashley. My name is Saley Fakorzi. I'm the Director of Mental Health at Timely Care. And primarily in my role, I work with ongoing education and development of our provider base and work very closely with our mental health leadership team and the college and universities that we serve in this capacity.
And we'll pass it over to Mark.
Well, hello, everybody. Mark Petishnock. I'm the Vice President of School Programs Implementation at the JED Foundation, having worked at several different universities over the course of my career, two of which were JED campuses that brought really kind of a comprehensive approach to this work on a college campus. And so it's good to be here with you today. I'm in Southwest Michigan for any of those Midwesterners on the call today. So good to be here with you.
Awesome. And Anne.
Hello, everybody. My name is Anne Warbach, and I'm a Senior Director of Programs at Inside Track. And Inside Track is a national nonprofit who advances all learners through the power of coaching. I'm based in Portland, Oregon, and I've been at Inside Track for 17 years. And the reason I stay is the power of coaching. And it's a pleasure to be here with y'all today.
Fantastic. So let's jump right in because I know that we are all excited to hear what you have to say and all of the awesome information that you can share with the group. So we are going to start with a question about you guys are all on the ground working in institutions every day to help them better serve their students. Where are the biggest pain points that institutions are facing relating to student mental health challenges, and how has this changed in just the last few years?
So I can get this started. The one idea that we have discussed a great deal with many of the campuses that we work with as a leading telehealth, in the telehealth space, we see a lot of the major concerns that directors at counseling centers at many of our colleges and universities are having. One common conversation is just around the higher acuity level of the students that are presenting. So many of these students are coming to campus sometimes for the first time, they're freshmen, or maybe have lived off campus or elsewhere. And after COVID, we all know that that kind of got mixed up for a lot of our students, exactly when they entered like more of a campus environment. But also what we've been seeing is just students coming in well educated, well informed, but also because they might be coming to college also already with a diagnosis, already with a list of medications and maybe some extensive history around their own mental health struggles, possible hospitalizations. And I think one of those things is just making sure that there's enough individuals on campus or resources to fully support a group of students that may have some higher needs, and also may be ready to access care in a way that might be a little more regular or frequent than we might have seen in the past.
Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. I think as a former counseling center director, I understand and concur, as I'm sure those on our call today can affirm as well. So I think right. So rising demand, higher acuity, meaning those with more severity, urgent, imminent needs of distress. I think that's something that I think we all have a general sense is occurring, either through our own education or just living in the realities each day. And I think in some ways we have done a good job, I think, as a field and as a culture of higher education of acknowledging that this is wider in scope than just what the counseling center or student health center can accomplish. And so I feel like we've made some progress on that. I think what has come out of that then is, okay, well then what does that look like beyond the counseling center? And I think generally we know that it's that one center, that one staff can't really span the spectrum of kind of early detection, prevention, intervention, kind of treatment of more severe concerns. Postvention, that's a lot for a certain staff, to say nothing of outreach and awareness efforts, right? So I think that's where a lot of current efforts are at universities, are really thinking about what does university-wide, campus-wide responsibility, ownership, and buy-in look like? how do you actually make sure that everybody is aware of the collective impact and the collective work? And then how do you prioritize and make decisions about where you focus things on? I think sometimes prevention can get squeezed out in that. It can feel like that may not be as possible when you have X number of students on a wait list or in a waiting room. And so I think that's where we tend to never feel like we're getting upstream. And so I think that was what I had faced when I was the counseling center director at two places. And at those places, we brought in the JED Foundation to help tackle that area. And so, for example, the comprehensive approach, that we've taken that I, helped implement at the universities I was at, kind of really focused on 7 domains. And I think sometimes it can be helpful to break those down. And so the domains that have been identified from our foundation, which really was modeled after United States Air Force and work that was done in the late 90s about how do you actually deal with suicide prevention and promote mental health in a confined community. And so that research spanned this model and as applied to higher ed, but it includes things like making sure that you're actually developing life skills within a certain population, like resiliency. Also creating a culture of social connection and belonging as actually a core component of this work. Thirdly, identifying students at risk, as we all know. Fourth, also encouraging oneself to seek help. And I think we can think about that more broadly, that we can seek help in a lot of different places that might not be in a clinical environment. Fifth place is actually the provision of mental health and substance use services, which, as my colleague here from Timely helps to expand that possibility for universities. And then, of course, having actual crisis management procedures and policies in place that are actually lived and practiced and known and useful and reviewed and updated. And then lastly, thinking about, environmental landscape and reducing lethality related to lethal means, and thinking about where and how do these type of behaviors of harm occur and how are we addressing that and being aware of that. So that kind of comprehensive approach, you'll notice that the counseling center is involved in some of them, but not all of them. And there are tons of folks. So it's really about identifying it, having a strategic plan, promoting the buy-in, and tackling this as a long-term ongoing piece of work beyond just how do we hire more counselors or how do we deal with the backlog on a wait list. So I'll add that. And I think actually how we do that over time has kind of become the question. I've seen a lot of good things at different universities.
Thanks, Mark. One thing that I'll add to this in terms of what we see regarding pain points is that just this feeling of people having to do more with less. At Inside Track, we partner a lot with organizations and institutions, and we provide training on our coaching methodology and approach. And as we're meeting with staff across institutions, organizations, I feel like we're hearing it everywhere right now. It's just this tug and pull of like, I know I want to do this, I can do this, but I don't have the time, the resources, or the skill potentially to do it. So there is this feeling of more with less, and how do we do it scalably, given some of the very real realities that we're facing right now. The other thing I'll mention is just compassion fatigue by those that are doing the work. If things are becoming more challenging and more intense, the people serving them, it's going to be more challenging and more intense. So how are we supporting those who support our students? Because both are necessary.
And there was a question, Anne, what best practices with the coaching approach that you can speak about? And this kind of goes into our next question about like an initiative or strategy that you are able to use and implement on these campuses.
Absolutely. So I'll talk a little bit about our coaching methodology, because that really does speak to some of those proactive approaches that we're using on a regular basis to support people and their well-being. So one of the things that we do in coaching is we don't just focus on the knowledge that people need to move towards their goals. We're also focusing on the knowledge, skills, and beliefs that they hold to help them to determine where we can move forward. Because somebody might have the knowledge of like, I know I need to do this, but Is it the motivation that's stopping them? Is it the belief in themselves that's stopping them? So really tapping into to the learner, who, what they need, what they're looking to get out of this experience, and then thinking, how do we tap into the area that's really going to help them move forward? Is it their knowledge, skills, or beliefs? Um, the other thing, the other sort of initiative that we have at Inside Track is our crisis support services. So I think this also speaks to sort of that compassion fatigue element as well. So when our coaches are working directly with learners and they're speaking on the phone, on Zoom, texting, however it may show up, sometimes our learners present crisis situations. And we offer our crisis support team, so our CSS team, that allows for, as the coach is working with a learner and hears about challenging situations or they're at risk of harming themselves or others, they then bring on our crisis support team. And that person, and I think this speaks, Mark, to your point about, having a crisis management plan. What happens when these things come up, because they are very real and come up often. And so we'll bring on a crisis support person, and that is their sole role, is to really dive in, understand what crisis that person is dealing with in that moment, and providing resources or referrals to necessary resources to help them move out of that situation. I think the other piece to that that's really key is it also supports our coach, because the coach might be dealing with secondary trauma related to what that learner is bringing up. So the crisis support offers support for that learner in that situation, but also for the coach who might be helping that student through that situation. So that's really key in our work. And I think one other thing I'll add is that in our coaching, we do everything through a healing centered approach. So we're really looking at responding with empathy, making sure that we're truly, respecting the student, protecting them, and working with them to, move out of the current situation that they're in. So just want to highlight that there are multiple kind of approaches within our coaching that really help support mental health and general well-being of the people that we serve.
Thank you for that also. And I would just jump in to just talk a little bit about how we, with Timely Care, what we've seen over recent times, and what's been a focus point for us is making sure that we are providing students with care and support after hours and weekends, because a lot of times what we've seen is over 50 to 60% of our visits are happening outside of business hours, outside of the 9 to 5 time. I believe Anne hit on a very important point, is with that crisis support, and what does that look like on both sides? What does it look like for students? What does it look like for faculty and staff? And our initiative to expand what crisis support looks like with a newer service line called Crisis Now, which is really just an enhancement of everything that we've been doing to help students support that are in crisis in the moment, and making sure that we have the bandwidth to do so, because that's a major important piece to being able to have a fully functioning crisis response team that not only deals with the crisis in the moment, but also the follow-up care that many of our campuses are so interested in understanding exactly what's happening with the student, even post-crisis. And also what's happening with those students that may not need to be transported to a hospital or in an emergent situation, but they need an eyes-on wellness check, and they may be okay to be in their dorm room, but they also needed a safety plan in place. So how are we following up and making sure that those students are also well in the middle of the night and over the weekends and over the summer and when they're traveling? What does that look like for us? And so that's been a major concentration for us. And then allowing that crisis line also to be a support to faculty and staff that are needing another outlet to get students to care and to be able to help support that process. if it's campus security, if it's a professor, if it's an RA or an RD. I have a special passion and heart for our poor RAs and RDs that are on campuses across the country that are doing everything they possibly can to stand in the gap for their peers, in essence, and make sure that they're getting to the right level of care. But they may not feel comfortable with having extensive knowledge around mental health or clinical treatment and care, and they shouldn't have to. That's where we step in and want to provide them with that valuable support, not only training and helping in those spaces, but also that support in the moment, so they don't have to feel like they have to be the expert, but they can be the ones that connect to care. And that's also a very much so life-saving, life-changing measure to be in that space.
As I was actually just speaking to a colleague. So I was an RA and then I was a graduate assistant for housing. And the training 20 years ago spent maybe an hour or two on these types of crisis and moments that for us to be trained as a 19 and 20-year-old. And now I just spoke to someone at the University of Central Florida and they spend 4 to 5 days training these RAs on the proper techniques and giving them the knowledge. So I am thankful that housing and residential life across the board is getting on being proactive with this. We did have a question. What specific support programs, resources would you suggest for staff, like mental health support to help address minimizing or managing secondary trauma?
Well, I will just say what we've been offering, and what's been more of a focus for us also is faculty and staff support, being able to be in that place of making sure that we're available and our mental health leadership team is available to answer some of those harder questions. I've had professors reach out and have honestly just said, I am not in a position to have an entire conversation around grief and loss. I signed up to teach chemistry, and that is not my wheelhouse. And as a matter of fact, I'm dealing with my own issues around grief and loss, and I don't have the capacity to do so. We've had several inputs of information that we've seen over the past few years from Boston University School of Public Health, as well as other resources that have talked to us. Inside Higher Ed in 2023 also had a report just around the level of pressure and stress, and also, just vicarious trauma as well as depression symptoms that are presented in faculty and staff when they are managing those conversations around health and well-being with students, and they don't feel properly trained or capable of doing so. So what we've offered is more of the ongoing education, but also that in the moment support to have a conversation with a professional so that they can kind of role play as far as how am I going to have this conversation? How do I point them in the right direction? You'll hear me say a lot today is just pointing students in the right direction can be some of the weight that we take off of our faculty and staff. You don't have to be the expert, but you can also, let's get the information amongst everyone, normalize that conversation, and make sure that they can point students in the right direction.
Thank you. How can institutions involve students in designing the support systems that work for them? Like, how can students have a voice in these types of initiatives?
Yeah, I think that is the question. And oftentimes we design these things for them on their behalf. And then, sometimes then have to retrofit things once we hear feedback. And so, ideally that's not the way we do this, right? So I think it's not a one-time thing. And I think it's real. I think for me, the question is, how do you infuse that as a cultural norm within the fabric of program design and clinical design, in terms of how you design, how you pilot, how you assess, how you reintegrate that knowledge. And I think a big part of this is actually creating a culture where students feel like their voice matters. And so I think, on the one hand, it's like, okay, how do we get this input? Great. That doesn't always happen. When it happens, it's great. But there's that layer underneath of which students are we getting? Are we just getting the students who are on the student health advisory committee or the student leaders? Like, are we making sure that we're getting the voices of those who might have reasons not want to participate. So I think one of it is making sure that you're actually getting a full representation and looking at that, whatever voices you're able to get through surveys or focus groups. Either as general clinical student data and compare that to your student population at large to make sure you have a representative sample. And then to also actually, maybe as part of that, is to actually ask questions about the degree to which students have reassurance that their voice is going to be heard, and if they feel like it has been heard, and actually have the process of gathering the feedback in and of itself be a high part of the process, and not just kind of something that may have various degrees of assumption of how that may or may not be working. So that's the first thing I would say. I also think it's important to kind of have, those students be part of ongoing, task force. For example, when the JED Campus initiative aligns with any university, it's a 4-year program where we come to your campus and there's a task force committee. And so it's really important to have student representation there. And oftentimes the students who are on there are actually representing the voices of many other students who maybe don't attend those meetings, but who they funnel those voices through other ways. And I think those are things that are important. But I think the question, I would encourage schools to ask themselves when they're engaging in that process is, which students are we not hearing from? And why aren't we hearing from them? And what issues do that reflect that otherwise are not going to be acknowledged in this process? And to actually spend a significant amount of time on that, and then to see actually, the degree to which that may overlap with those students who have whatever degree of kind of, whether it's the melt of, from matriculation into the, subsequent years, or if it's withdrawals for health or other academic reasons, to really kind of make sure we're addressing health disparities. And I think when you do those things over time, it becomes real to students that their voices matter. The university or community college is actually capturing those who maybe their voice is a whisper, or it's not out loud at all. So a few thoughts.
I would have to completely agree with Mark. I think the focus being on those students that may be suffering in silence and not really feel like they have a voice is a great focus. And so if we can match data and results up with that student population, I think we'll be tapping into something new. I know we always talk about where to put QR codes with our marketing team, and listening to schools talk about the Toilet Chronicles, where they put all the news and important information for students to get to capture. Where do they put that information about new resources and where to go if they're in trouble? That's usually in a bathroom. So, and how do we make sure that we're reaching everyone? But I think the other space is when we're creating this information, how do we get those student voices to be a lot louder? So I have the vantage point of really understanding what college campuses are doing in different spaces. One of the most innovative or newer creative things that I've heard recently is a campus that focused on the badging information across campus. So when students are going into certain areas, there's a recording of everywhere a student badges into, and understanding the groups of students that are badging into maybe athletic facilities or workout facilities, or public events when their badges are scanned, or the cafeteria, and where you see lower and higher representation of certain student groups. And then also, if you have students that you're understanding that aren't badging into certain areas at all. So maybe those that aren't as active or aren't attending certain activities, what's happening with them. And what they did find is that lower activity levels of some students also pointed to lower engagement, maybe also pointed to a sense of not feeling like they belong. So again, to Mark's point, that belonging factor is a huge piece of what it looks like for voices and a diverse voices to be heard on a campus. And so understanding ways to match up data along with those voices that may not be heard most frequently, I think is a really good thing. Having individuals with eyes on, such as RAs and RDs that are involved in everyday to-day life with students, is another place to point out those issues or areas of concern, and then targeting how we're going to approach those students. And I know in that specific school, they decided the students with the lowest activity of badging across campus, they would automatically get a lunch. scheduled with someone in leadership on campus to see what type of engagement would be necessary for them. Optional, of course, but also a good conversation starter, not only to tell them that they're important, but also to kind of pick their brains around what we could do better or different.
I think this brings me, so back when I'm in my master's degree in higher education, there was this very practical study about the first 6 weeks on a college campus and how important it is to have those new freshmen or new adult learners get involved in some way. It pretty much can determine if they're going to stop out or drop out at the end of their college career. So, Anne, did you come off mute?
Yeah, I just wanted to share one additional thought, like ditto to everything that's been said. And thinking about how institutions can involve students in designing it, I also think they can involve students as part of that solution. And thinking about where are there areas of people, that aren't showing up, that aren't engaging, and using peer support or near peer support to engage those learners, because sometimes they might not respond to adult. They might feel disconnected to me because we're from a different background and they want to speak with somebody from the same background. How can we involve those that are near peers or peers to help them feel like they do belong and get connected to people that might not be so open to engage? So I think that's just a real opportunity that I see. And like one other thing that comes up for me in that is that there are learners at our schools or grad students that want to go into coaching, want to go into counseling, want to go into these fields. So it's not the RA that just wants to, have some financial support. It's also, there are people that want to do this, and this could be experience that feeds their resume and their experience while also supporting those that are, living and struggling with mental health currently on campus. So I think it's also like listening and learning and iterating on our services and also involving.
Mark, did you want to add anything to this question?
Oh, no, that's okay.
Awesome. For frontline staff and faculty, how do we help to make them feel comfortable in supporting student mental health?
I would just say we go back to the education and normalizing the conversation. I don't believe that can be, we can emphasize that part enough. The more we normalize, the more we create a culture of caring across the entire campus, the more this is a part of preventative conversations. We can start talking about how do we support students that may be what we consider subclinical. They are not they're not in those areas of crisis or suicidal ideation, thoughts of harming self or others. They are more in the space of, I might feel down. I don't want to be around people, or I don't feel like peopling. That's one of my favorite. Or they've just stopped going to lunch with friends. So like Anne pointed to all the peer involvement. I think more education in the peer space as well as in the faculty and staff space is also great. Giving faculty and staff solutions as far as how to integrate easily what that message could look like in their coursework, such as putting QR codes within a syllabus, creating extra credit conversations around, hey, let's complete make sure you connect with a health coach. Everyone could use a health coach. I think everyone on this screen would love a meeting with a health coach. It's something that is baseline, a conversation more around wellness and what that looks like, as opposed to there's a problem and that's what we're addressing. And I think the more we have a conversation around holistic wellness and what it means to live a life worth living and feeling confident about skills that you can use to de-escalate in the moment, or skills to use to increase your level of self-care. Those are conversations that everyone should be having just to live a better life in general. And so I think once we normalize that, help equip our faculty and staff around what that looks like, because we talk about student retention. I think it's also very important during these conversations to talk about faculty and staff retention, and that comes from support. It comes from guidance, it comes from education. So while we're increasing the health literacy around our students and that conversation, we can also do it around for faculty and staff members also to help them feel comfortable. It might be easier to say, how about, you at least try out a health coaching session as opposed to you need to go to therapy. I think something is wrong. That could be an easy way, an easy on-ramp to care, or even using self-care content. I know a lot of our campuses really hone in on self-care content as a way for students to recognize warning signs and symptoms and have that more built connection between mind and body of you might need a little more sleep during finals time because you're going to have some increased stress and sleep is going to help that. So normalizing some of those wellness conversations, I think is another good place to land also.
Well, that's great. I'd echo all of that. I think that's wonderful. I think there was a part of your question that really resonated with me, which is how can they feel confident? And for me, that's not about what they do, but if they do. And, in working with, a lot of folks at universities through various bystander intervention type programs that I think many of us may be aware of, there were always kind of this Q&A part, right? And a lot of times folks would say, but, I really don't like if I say the word suicide, is that going to make it worse? Is this my job? I don't like, what if they actually say they have a problem? And so I think it's like this nuance of, I feel like if you're working on a college campus, your heart is usually there to serve, be part of an educational community. That thing that oftentimes can hold folks back is it's almost like we need permission. And I think this is a culture that the university and within your supervisor and your unit to really set some expectations and cultural norms around, it's okay to have the conversation the wrong way. It's not okay not to have the conversation. And so to have some things like that and say also, not sure I've ever met anybody that had a conversation, didn't feel a little awkward. Okay. So if you're feeling awkward, like, hey, you're probably on the right road. Okay. So having a conversation, as long as I do that, that's good. I'm going to feel awkward. That's okay. Saying the word suicide does not increase the risk of suicide. It actually does the opposite. Okay, good to know that. Do I actually know where the counseling center is? Do I actually know the telehealth services? Do I know the crisis number? Like, am I going to fumble it, or is that a piece of information that I just need to probably learn and put, okay, maybe that's part of the confidence. And I think all of those things can really factor in, and especially if there's a at large, like, does your chancellor, does your community college president, does your vice president say it is our collective responsibility to care for the health and well-being of our students? Is that statement something that you've heard from your leadership? Is that written somewhere? Is it feeling like that's actually part of your job? And if it's not, maybe it needs to be. I would say it should. And then it's about, okay, well, what are the expectations for what you do? And yes, it is your role. No, it's not going to increase your risk or liability. Like, no, it's not going to, you have to say the right thing. But I think in some ways that talking about the thing that we say inside our head and the reason we keep walking or the reason we don't talk to the student, like that thing, like the quiet part can be said out loud and normed and socialized, might get that person, all right, I'm going to have an awkward conversation. I'm going to fumble this. And I think it's about getting that person over that awkward moment.
We have a ton of questions coming in about supporting online learners and adult learners who are not on campus and may have different needs than others. How do you tailor support to these students as a frontline worker? And then also just like what initiatives do you have for these students?
I will jump in and just say, I think to Mark's point of just having the conversation, I think we underestimate sometimes the power of connection and someone feeling seen and heard and valued. And just even having that conversation of how are you, and not focusing. We were even meeting earlier today as an organization and talking about, as we, work with different leaders on campus, and train them on our coaching methodology and approach. One person said, or one advisor had said, the first thing I'm going to do is focus on you, not your course schedule, not whatever else is on my agenda, but you. And I think that power of starting at the human level, basic human level of I'm here for you can do a lot to, help them feel like they belong, like they have a trusted adult in their corner, and help them feel like they can do it and overcome challenges. And so just want to highlight that there's tons of tools and processes, but the power of human connection and relationships and belonging is huge.
Okay. The someone was asking about providing care after hours. How is that care and support provided after hours and on weekends?
I can jump in there just to talk about what we've been doing from a telehealth standpoint. I will start out by saying very carefully. So it does take a lot of coordination and orchestration of a very involved staff that is dedicated to the work, but also just making sure that we have quality vetted providers that are available during those times, during all times. But I think that starts at the front end process of making sure from start to finish, everyone has crisis training. Everyone knows how to do risk assessment in a way where we're not overclassifying or underclassifying, which means we're not overshooting the mark. Every student does not, like I said earlier, does not need to be transported to a hospital for safety. Many of them do need a safety plan. Sometimes understanding what resources and how to help them build a library of resources and supportive individuals around them. So they start to understand what healthy support looks like and how that can be a help to them is really just building up levels of confidence in the students, as well as their ability to have more resilience within some of the issues or complications that they're experiencing in life. So giving them the tools, but also giving them a shoulder to lean on it also at the same time. And making sure that even those conversations, what we notice a lot of times, conversations aren't always about, I want to hurt myself. It's sometimes I'm having trouble communicating, and this is causing some major issues in important relationships that I'm having. I was just talking to a group on a campus in New York the other day, and we were talking about how relationships are trending right now. And so many students are calling in after hours, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning is when they start to think about the relationships that aren't going well with parents or siblings or with significant others, and how do I overcome those obstacles. But being able to have any range of conversation, making sure students don't feel like they have to say that they're going to hurt themselves in order to get the support they need. They can talk about absolutely anything that's causing them any level of stress or anxiety so that they can get those conversations behind them and focus on the things that they are most concerned about, which is their education, and continuing that process. But what does that look like to provide that support? I think is really focused on the quality of the providers that you're putting in front of students at those wee hours of the morning or any time of the day and night, and making sure that we're properly assessing what the need is and then meeting them where it's most comfortable for the student, meeting them where they would like to be reached, and providing what they need in the moment.
Well, I would concur with all that. And I think that really folds into this idea of there's no wrong door. Sometimes it's 2 in the morning and it's about relationships. And the term crisis is really relative to the person. And, and just because it's not like an imminent crisis that requires hospitalization, I think sometimes we can, if we're offering a crisis services and we as the administrators or the service providers are defining that and the student is not actually meeting that definition, I think we can think about, oh, this isn't one of those, that isn't a crisis. And we can tend to think about it in that box. But really that box is just that door to get the student in the system. And so I think one of the things about the crisis service that I think what I would just highlight is one, make sure, like at a university, no matter your resources, I would encourage you to make sure there is something that's known to every student. And sometimes that's an MOU or a partnership with the local community mental health service or the local 911 dispatch or like the place where that need can get met, even if it's not at the university or hired through the university. And then the other thing is to really think through whether it's a contracted or a partnership or it's actually something that the institution pays for and hires, to really think about how that is integrated into the awareness of the university. And one of the benefits of hiring a service or having a partnership is to be able to, 8 o'clock the next business day, for you to actually know who those students were. And so they came in the door at 2:30 in the morning, maybe not in the crisis in the ways that we would define through hospitalization, but that would be good to plug them into any other resource that we might do during an initial appointment. That's really important. I think sometimes we may not go that extra step, or that might seem difficult, and often it is, but it's really important to do that. And also think about how is that information then coordinated and shared with the behavioral threat assessment or, behavioral intervention teams and the student health. And so are we sharing information in the right ways? And oftentimes there can be some opportunities that may occur from that. And there's issues with informed consent, but I think there's really an opportunity to really integrate that after hours connection to make sure the students don't get lost in the aftermath.
Thank you. There is an important question that I wanted to ask before we move on to some of the audience questions. How do we ensure that mental health services don't live in a silo, but integrate with academic, career, and life services for truly wraparound support, including basic needs, transportation, or living wage as essential interventions? It's kind of loaded.
I'm happy to start. So I think, I guess the questions I would ask is it part of your university or your college's strategic plan? And if it's not, try to figure out how to get it in that, because hence the resources and prioritization often flow. And I think it's important to actually, when you're at an institution, I think as an administrator who's advocating for mental health, I feel like one of our core jobs is to figure out, how does an argument win at this university or this college? How do decisions get made? What are the unwritten priorities? How are decisions made? And so I think trying to figure out how you tap into that. So if an institution is really focused on, right now, we're under 5% budget cut. Okay, so we need effective resources without additional money. Okay, so whatever I propose needs to be that. And how can I support other units, maybe not having to cut money, if we can figure out ways to reduce, retention loss over in this department, if that's tied with mental health. I mean, maybe it's other type of things. So one, I think it's about figuring out how those decisions are actually made. But I also think it's about, helping every single person understand that mental health is part of their job. And also think about other ways that we're, for example, increasing disparity. And so the students have to pay a fee to go to the health center or to go to the fitness center. That could be a major difference maker for a student with depression. And so I think thinking about the ability to do that could be something that you end up advocating for, and that maybe not be within the same area that you're working in, but that could be something, how you connect the dot, in doing that. So, I think it's about really tying into the value and the mission and the spirit. And if you're in a public institution, usually that's about access, and especially at land-grant universities, and talking about access to education isn't just admission, it's about the ability to absorb information and the ability to be in a place where you can do that. In order to do that, we know you have to be in a healthy place. So I think it's really about, whether it's the values of the institution, financial realities, decision-making, whatever, it's about figuring out, how do I tap in to what's relevant now, who's making the decisions, how those decisions are getting made, and aligning and allying with those folks.
Yeah, I would add, and making sure everybody knows and is aware of the different resources. I think, Sally, you had mentioned just like having QR codes on syllabi and whatnot, making sure people know where are the resources that I can share with my students if they bring up a basic need that they're struggling with. And just to double down on your point, Mark, about making sure that the resources are actually accessible and will work for the learner population. If it's on the ground and they need to go to a food pantry, but they need transportation, but they don't have transportation to get to the food pantry, then the food pantry does nothing for our learners, right? So how are we creating accessible tools and resources, and 100% just the recognition that this is not just one person's job. This is all of us together and in support of mental health and well-being.
We have a question. We're living in a time of heightened and simultaneous crises happening in this country and in the world. How do folks need to operate different, or do they, to support learners in this time of heightened crisis need for mental health support and community care?
I think I can jump in here. Just understanding that all the things, it's so great to just listen to Anne and Mark just expound on some of the conversations. But I think it goes back to some of the things that we've been talking about is exposure, normalizing the conversation, and making sure everyone has access to understanding what the resources are that are available. Every college campus is so unique. There's a specialized community on every single college campus. And within that, we have so many diverse groups of students that comprise of that college campus. A lot of times we think of, at Timely Care, we think of our college campus that we work with is about 3.6 million students. So that's a diverse college campus for us. And understanding that diversity looks like more of an umbrella approach these days. It's not just gender, race, and ethnicity. It's lived experiences. It's intersecting identities. It's understanding what it looks like to come from different socioeconomic backgrounds, with understanding that individuals have encountered different issues around basic needs or access to resources or education around health and health literacy. So while we're looking at all of that and we understand that the world around us is changing frequently, how do we message and support students that are also experiencing the impact of everything that changes around us? And what we need to understand is that our students are well informed. They do listen to the news. They do care about the things that adults care about, finances and financial aid and money issues are a thing, and they do compound upon stress levels and depression levels of students. They do care about world issues. But what we also know is that our student body is pretty resilient too. They're utilizing resources. They're raising their hand for help more often. They are looking for options and ways. And like Mark said earlier, there's no wrong door. Understanding that everyone needs access to care. And it's an all hands on deck approach. And that's something that I'm super passionate about, because we want students to seek care. We want them to get their questions answered, but there are so many questions coming from different directions. Giving them access and resources from community organizations to college campuses to what's out there that's vetted, and also, very it's different than getting, maybe a TikTok diagnosis, but we want them to have access to vetted and very much reliable evidence-based information so that they can rely upon the things that they're hearing. So it goes back to that education and the access and the normalizing of the conversations. But I think that part encompasses what our students are needing, even in these more complicated conversations. And the more we can do to point them in the right direction and give them access, I think we're doing the very most that we can. I just can't stress enough is how much I've seen students just educate themselves and build a level of resiliency around them being able to say, hey, I need help, or I have questions, and things are a little different than what I thought, but what do you think about this, and how can I get the help that I need? And I think that's been a huge kudos to the students that we work with on a regular basis.
Yeah. And I would just add to that briefly, the need for flexibility. I think the rigidity and the standardization of academic curriculum and classroom policies, and put your video on, or deadline is for this assignment's on this date, or it has to be in this form. Does it have to be? And I think to really meet a more diverse body of students, not only who they are and their intersecting identities, but what their reality is on any given day, we have to ask ourselves, what's the balance between the importance of what we feel is standardizing things for the ease of fairness and or for the just convenience of ourselves as a faculty member, for example, or even as an administrator in a student service area, and to think about how can I maximize flexibility to try to help this student, even if it doesn't fit the bill of what someone might have thought when they wrote up a policy or wrote up a curriculum at some point.
That's such a great point. One thing I wanted to add to the conversation is we were talking earlier, I was talking with a colleague about attending a student panel recently, and one of the highlights that the students shared in that panel, and these were community college students, was keep the resources coming. Like, I think there's also an element of you might get this resource in your inbox or your text message today, but then that situation doesn't hit you in which you'd need that resource until 3 weeks from now. So you didn't remember you had it. And I think oftentimes as people that serve students, we might have mentioned this resource 100 times today, but did that one learner hear it that needed it? So you can't underestimate, I guess, the the power of repetition of resources so that it hits the student's inbox or, text message at the time that they need it. So keep repeating.
We have one more question that we are able to get to. So, how can frontline employees in daily practice proactively address mental health needs of students so they don't reach the breaking point?
I can jump in. I think this really comes back to proactive outreach and connection, and meeting that human where they are. And I think just to reiterate and double down on the power of human connection, people want to belong. They want a sense of belonging. They want to feel like I can do this. I can be successful. I was meant to be here. And as a staff member or support on campus, we have the power to make them feel like they belong. And sometimes that's a phone call, sometimes that's a meeting in an office. Sometimes it might be a motivational text message because we knew something was going on that day that was tough for them and we want to reach them in that moment. But I think that's why I love coaching so much, and is that it is that proactive piece to build a connection and build a relationship with somebody, and the power of having a trusted adult in your corner is huge. So we can be that for our students.
That's great. I would just add briefly, I think, you know, pre-matriculation screening can be awesome if it happens. It's one of those things that I think everyone's like, yeah, like I'm just seeing like nodding their head to. For some reason, the technological figuring out how to do that, or is this clinical information, or which department has responsibility over that, or how do we do that, and how do we track that over time? Like those type of red tape questions can be figured out, but oftentimes they can prevent schools from doing a standard process. When students come in, have a voluntary questionnaire that really ask a lot of questions and all, not just health or mental health related, but across the spectrum, and then proactively to connect them with resources before they even show up to campus. I think doing that can be a proactive approach as well.
One last.
I will,
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
oh no, I was just going to interject that. I really agree with what Mark and Ann were saying, and sometimes just exactly how to use that data to get us in front of some of the issues that we may be seeing on our specific or unique campuses is a really strong point for campuses being able to see what students are interested in and then tailor resources toward targeting some of the areas of pain points or also of interest, letting that be the focal point of how we develop groups and how we develop programming, and then how dollars are focused on campuses to really meet students where they are. So just reiterating the things that they said are very important with the data piece.
We have just a few minutes. I'm going to go through this last question. What's one move institutions could make right now to better support student mental health and well-being? So leaving this meeting, what can these attendees do to better mental health? 30 seconds each. Because we can solve it all in 30 seconds.
Who wants to go first? I can. I would say look at the people in your care that you're supporting and think, what do they need from me today? And pick up the phone and call. I think just it can't hurt. There's no wrong door. And a connection will help someone feel like they belong and will support their wellness, knowing someone cares.
Yeah.
I love that. I think, I have a lot of big picture things that I could want to say. That's where mine naturally goes. But the next time you're within, I'm going to just say it in a different way. But I think next time, anyone on this call is in a sphere of influence, whether you're leading a meeting, you're right last, say in front of any audience, just say, can you each think of one or two people right now in your life in any way, shape, or form that just could use hey, how's it going? Do you have time to check in? Who would that person be? And can you actually challenge yourself to reach out the coming day or two? So I would actually think big, but I would go, so Anne, pretty much the same thing.
Funny how we all have the same answer. My first thought was clinical collaboration. What does it mean to help support even just one individual student? And how does that look as far as the support that we give to an entire campus? Is when we're figuring it out for one student or one faculty member, we're also solving problems and issues for the other students and faculty members. So we're asking those hard questions and coming up with answers and support. So checking in that way, I think it just makes me think about those campuses that have one clinical director, just one counselor, and checking in on them too.
Awesome. Well, I just wanted to thank everyone for all the panelists for their information. I wanted to thank all of the audience members for your questions. We apologize that we didn't get to all of them, but we will drop all the information if you want to contact Mark, Saley, or Anne, and they can definitely be available to help you. These organizations are all fantastic, and we all have the same goal, and that's why it's kind of cool that in the nonprofit and the mental health space, we all just want to make community colleges and higher education institutions better. So thank you guys for joining, and we will see you at the next webinar. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.